Greetings to everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. To my returning subscribers, thank you for being part of the family. And if you are new, please subscribe if you feel the content is worthy and it has value. Please do subscribe, and you need to turn on the notification bell so that you get every content that we drop, so that you don't miss anything. And also, please do comment below. I've been getting a lot of DMs, and I'm very grateful, and also I understand that it's not easy to just comment and open up to the whole world concerning such issues. But please don't be discouraged. If you are ready to comment on the section down below, please. But if you're still comfortable with the DMs, it's still fine. Today, what we're going to be talking about is trauma. How do we define trauma? What is trauma, and the impacts of trauma? And also, hopefully, you will look into what it means to be healed. What is healing? What does wholeness mean? Before we get right into it, I just want to put a disclaimer that I am not a psychologist. I am not a therapist. I am not a neurologist. I'm just Nosizo, who's speaking from experience, because I have navigated the journey of healing my own traumas. So I'm speaking purely from that place. So what is trauma? What do you understand by the word trauma? Trauma is from a Greek word for wound. It is the malfunctioning of the emotional and the psychological well-being of a person. Trauma is not the experience or the traumatic event, but it is what happens on the inside of you as a result of the trauma. I want to say that again. Trauma is not the experience. It is not the traumatic event. It is what happens on the inside of you as a result of the trauma. So there's a distinction between trauma and stress. This is how I like to define trauma for people to better understand. Stress is when there's a situation that is occurring, and once that situation is over, the stress is over. Let's assume you have a tire burst. At that time, you experience the stress, but once the tire is fixed, you're okay. The stress subsides or it disappears. Trauma, on the other hand, you relive it in your body. Every time something happens that triggers that pain, you relive the experience like it's the first time you feel the pain. So it's an occurring pain. You relive it in your body. That is trauma. And then when it comes to trauma, we have what we call the big traumas and the small traumas. I'd like to define the big traumas as the big T's, and the small traumas as the small t's. We often make the mistake of thinking the small traumas are not significant as the big traumas. The big traumas involve things like when you've been raped. That is intense. When you've gone through a divorce, when you've been in an accident and maybe lost your eye or your limb. Those fall under the big traumas. And then the small traumas involve things like name calling, when you're often belittled, when there's manipulation going on, or when you are humiliated. The small traumas are very much significant, or they have the same effect as the big traumas, because when they happen over a long period, let's make an example. If I tell you that you are stupid, if I tell you that you are dumb, that hurts. That's a trauma. Maybe at first you might just discard it or not really believe it, but over a long period, if I tell you that if you make a mistake once, you'll then start believing that, by the way, they say I'm dumb, I'm a fool. It means I am a fool, you know. So we cannot just say they are not significant in that sense, because they do cause a long and deep effect, just like the big traumas. And I want us to look also in the impacts of trauma. I want us to dive deep in it and name the different impacts of trauma. This will help. This will help you identify if you're a victim. This will help people identify if there are people around them who are dealing with trauma. So one of the impacts of trauma, it is the separation or disconnection from self. That's one impact. What do I mean separation from self or disconnection from self? You understand that we are born with intuition. Others call it the inner voice. Others call it the gut feeling. Everyone was born with that, and it has helped us stay out of danger, because you understand that you can't just put your hand in an open fire, because it is the inner voice or the intuition that will tell you that that's danger. So it really separates you from who you are, the core of yourself. You stop dreaming. You stop believing in your dreams. If you knew that you were born for greatness, you just then believe that to be a lie. You go into a shell where you don't live those dreams because you don't believe it. That's how you separate from yourself. You no longer listen to your inner voice, to your gut feeling. The second impact of trauma is isolation or disconnection from others. You withdraw from people. Usually people do it by picking up an addiction to numb the pain or self-medicate. And when I speak of addiction, it could be any form of addiction. It could be drug addiction. It could be work addiction. It could be social media addiction. So if people are spending long hours withdrawn and burying themselves in other things or addiction, that is another impact of trauma. They isolate from other people. They don't usually engage. They are just not interested in what other people are doing. So that's another impact of trauma. The third impact of trauma is you then have an altered worldview or distorted worldview. You see the world through a broken lens. You have your own view of the world. Usually you think of the world as the worst place, as being hostile, unsafe, because of the trauma that you have endured. Yes, the world is full of violence, the world is full of hostility, but it's also full of love. There is a safe place in the world. But if you've been through trauma, you have your fixed version of the world. You view the world for the worst. Like, if you feel like it's hostile, that's your reality. And that's another impact of trauma. The fourth impact of trauma is lifelong suffering. Lifelong pain, which is lifelong suffering. Until you deal with the pain, that's when it stops. When I speak of lifelong pain, it is because every time you have a trigger, you relive that moment. Because a wound is just it's just pain that has a scar layer to tissue over it, but it's still that wound. So every time you are triggered, you relieve that pain. That is why we say it's a lifelong pain. The fifth impact of trauma is that you have an affected cognitive development. Your brain development is affected. Take, for instance, an infant, a child. When a child goes through abuse, that is traumatic. And it alters how the growth of the child. The child cannot grow like other kids because of the trauma that is happening to the child. So it really messes up the brain development, even in adults, because how do you see that one has been affected by it? Is that you know of somebody who who was an intellectual, who had bright ideas, and then all of a sudden, or after going through trauma, that person is just average, and even when you ask for ideas, they're just doing mediocre stuff. That's an impact of the trauma in their lives. That's point number 5. And then number 6 is that you carry personal shame. Trauma gives you a different sense of yourself, in that you are ashamed of who you are, not even at what you do. When you look at yourself, you're just ashamed. You lose self-worth. You lose self-love, self-value, because on the inside, when you look at yourself or perceive yourself, you're engulfed with so much. You have this shameful you have this shame over you. And then the last impact of trauma, obviously there are more, but I'm speaking on this because I understand the magnitude. I'm sure there are more impacts of trauma. The last one is difficulty being present. You know, what trauma does is that you're always stuck in the past. Even when making decisions, you're living in the present, and you think you are making a decision based on your present circumstances, yet you're still stuck in the past. The residue of the trauma is the one that is influencing your present decision. So trauma never allows you to be present. You're always affected in that aspect. Because we've spoken about trauma and the negative impact it has on people's life, I want us to jump into healing and wholeness. You've been hearing me talking about healing and wholeness, being healed and whole the whole time. Now I want us to look into it. What is healing? What does it involve? How can you tell if a person is healed, if a person has navigated through the journey to get to that place of complete wholeness? So, as I've alluded before, that healing involves disrupting the symptoms and the cycle of trauma in your life. That is what healing is. Dealing with the pain. You can be healed physically, or you can be cured. But the healing by itself doesn't mean that you are whole. It doesn't mean that you are whole. What is wholeness? Wholeness refers to the holistic and totality, and the totality of a well-being of a person. That is what wholeness is about. Looking at the different aspects of one's life. That could include psychologically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. Just looking at the totality of a person. That is what wholeness deals with. And for me, being healed meant that I had to do the work, the inner work. The inner work, I had to heal the being, and the being is me. I had to heal, and for me to get to a place of complete wholeness, I had to be vulnerable in going to the other aspects of my life, looking at how trauma has affected those aspects of my life. I often say, when you're whole, it means that your cup is full and it's overflowing, and you're giving from a place of overflow, not from a place of depletion, because you can't give from an empty cup. What happens when you give from an empty cup is that you easily fall into resentment, because you haven't dealt with the being, which is you. So healing and wholeness involve understanding yourself as a person. Are you self-aware? Do you understand what self-acceptance is? Self-aware involves knowing where you are in terms of your traumas. Do you have traumas that you need to deal with? Have you identified them? Self-acceptance involves understanding that you don't live in your past. Understanding that your past does not define who you are. Forgiving yourself. That is self-acceptance. And from that will come self-value and self-worth. You'll begin to esteem yourself highly, because now you've been able to love yourself enough. That self-love. You've been gentle. You've been able to look at the issues that are affecting your life or affecting you internally or emotionally or psychologically. Because believe me, you can be a success in all the other things, other aspects of your life, but you'll always come back to your emotional, because it is very important, because it spills over. You're holistic. You need to deal with yourself holistically, so that, because these things are interlinked. They are interrelational. If you don't deal with one aspect of your life, it will affect the other negatively. It'll show up in your other areas of your life. And someone who has done the work, let's talk especially in relationships. If you are whole, you know how to show up in relationships. What do I mean when I say you know how to show up in relationships? You take accountability of what you expect in those relationships, and you do the work And also you're able to tell if a relationship is serving you or not. You take time to decipher, to even ask uncomfortable questions, because you're trying to find out if the relationship is serving you or not. When I speak of relationship, it could be any relationships, in romantic relationships, in work relationships, in just generally in all relationships. And also if you are healed and you are whole, you are able to set boundaries for yourself, because boundaries help for you not to be triggered. Boundaries is a way of loving yourself, because other environments are very toxic, and you don't want to find yourself being triggered and then you fall into those traumas again. And you're able to express your needs and expectations in these relationships if you have done the inner work, if you've done the healing on the inside of you. What I can say is that we can't hide. We need to heal these traumas, because they have a way of showing up in our lives. We need to take accountability of taking stock of what we've gone through, just checking in with the therapy. Sometimes you don't have to be feeling some kind of way, but just making sure if you're in a good space, and also to identify if there are traumas that are living in you. So I think for this episode, this is the end of it. At least now we understand trauma. We understand what healing and wholeness mean, and also the benefits of healing, and also the impacts of trauma, that the impacts that trauma can cause in one's life. For now, I think that is all that I have, and hopefully we'll meet again on the next episode. I love you. Please do what you need to do in terms of subscribing. Thank you.